Time that I saw Pac, the stories earlier are the stories before Death Row. The Pac I was with was his last 8 months at Death Row. I was with him every day, even the last day, the last.
People understand it or not, there is a certain amount of and depth that comes along with the game. That's a part of doing business.
And our circle consists of four of the guys. Is myself, Tupac, and Snoop. So we sat down and we was eating and we was conversating. And me and Hammer go way back. So we was like, yeah, people trying to say Hammer, you shit ain't the bomb no more. So everybody's like, wait a minute, it ain't their decision to say what's good and what's not good. It's
So a wild old school interview from the 90s just resurfaced, where Suge Knight dropped a straight up bomb. He said he warned MC Hammer that Diddy was out here snatching artists and maybe even removing them just to cash in off their music after they were gone.
We finna call Hammer and put Hammer on Death Row. And we gonna go in there and make a record and make Hammer go sell all the records that he normally would sell and show the world, because there's a lot of people imitating.
Now, we already knew Diddy had a rep for flipping contracts, shady deals, and running behind-the-scenes plays. But Suge claiming he gave Hammer a heads up? That's a whole new twist. And don't forget, this was back when Hammer was still orbiting around Death Row. Folks act like Hammer was all pop and parachute pants, but nah.
And I don't want to lamb-blast nobody's name or anything, but they told me, Hammer, you know what the problem is? You're a little too clean. Here's what we're going to do. Why don't you start to do a few things that maybe dirty up your image a little bit. Maybe we can sell a little more records. I've had all that. I told him, that's not me. I lived that life. I've been around with people involved in that. I'm going to continue to do what I do. Whether they like it or not, I'm going to try to encourage the kids to do.
He was still active in the rap game during the 90s and even linked with Suge after Tupac passed. So Suge basically painted Diddy as a snake, one that slithers close to his artists, earns their trust, then flips the game on them for his own come-up.
Time that I saw Pac, the stories earlier are the stories before Death Row. The Pac I was with was his last 8 months at Death Row. I was with him every day, even the last day, the last.
And if you compare that to all the madness unraveling today, lawsuits, former artists spilling tea, it's kind of eerie how Suge's warning checks out. But now we gotta ask, what exactly did Suge tell Hammer behind closed doors?
People understand it or not, there is a certain amount of and depth that comes along with the game. That's a part of doing business.
And did Hammer ever run into Diddy again after that warning? Now let's clear something up real quick. Stanley Kirk Burrell, aka MC Hammer, was way more than just the guy sliding around in shiny pants screaming, "Can't touch this!"
And our circle consists of four of the guys. Is myself, Tupac, and Snoop. So we sat down and we was eating and we was conversating. And me and Hammer go way back. So we was like, yeah, people trying to say Hammer, you shit ain't the bomb no more. So everybody's like, wait a minute, it ain't their decision to say what's good and what's not good. It's I.
Yeah, he had hits like Too Legit to Quit and Pumps and a Bump. But under all that flash, Hammer was no joke. He had clout, he had backing, and he had the streets watching. A lot of rappers back then didn't give Hammer his respect, but they knew better than to cross him in real life. Hammer's stage shows were straight-up spectacles, pyro, dancers, wild outfits, the whole nine. Because of that flash, folks assumed he was just some pop act chasing radio hits. But that illusion didn't last long. Word on the street spread quick. Hammer was not the one to play with. Behind all that glitter, he had a real rep for handling beef quietly but effectively. No big blow-ups, no headlines, just problems getting handled behind the scenes. And everybody in the industry knew to tread lightly. Even the Crips didn't want that smoke. Back in the day, there was a situation where Hammer ran into some heat with them. And for most folks, that would have gone real left. But instead of it turning ugly, they actually came back and apologized to Hammer. That's how much weight his name carried. But here's the wildest part. While the rest of the rap scene was getting messy with the freak-offs and wild parties, Hammer wasn't caught up in none of that. Yeah, he had the money, the flash, and rolled deep with a squad. But he wasn't out here getting sloppy. No wild drinking stories. No scandalous hookups. No chaos. Dude kept it clean. He treated the game like a business, not a lifestyle. And it paid off. By his early 20s, MC Hammer was already a multimillionaire. His 1990 album, Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em, blew the roof off the industry and went diamond. That's 10 times platinum. Now here's where it gets even crazier. Hammer wasn't just stacking paper from music. He flipped his fame into a whole empire. Real estate, tech investments, fashion. Dude had his hands in everything. While other rappers were busy chasing the next party, Hammer was out here buying planes, hiring hundreds of people, and moving like a CEO. And despite the flashy image, he was tapped in with some serious players in the streets and the industry. That's why when Suge Knight came to him with that warning about Diddy, he didn't just brush it off. He listened. 'Cause Hammer might have danced on stage, but he watched everything off it. So when Suge said something wasn't right with how Diddy operated, how artists around him kept ending up broke, silent, or worse, Hammer paid attention. And that's what's so wild about this resurfaced clip. It shows this wasn't new. This energy around Diddy, it's been floating around for decades, just hiding in plain sight. People forget that Hammer had ties to a lot of folks we only hear whispers about now. He might not have been in the headlines like Tupac or Biggie, but he was right there when things went down. Close enough to feel the heat, but smart enough not to get burned. So the real question is, how many other warnings were out there? And how many people looked the other way while Diddy climbed higher? 'Cause if even Hammer was watching him back then, you know something was up. And let's be real, Hammer wasn't the only one hearing whispers about Diddy. A lot of folks in the industry were side-eyeing the way he moved, but nobody had the guts to say it out loud. Why? Because Diddy had power. He had connections. And if you crossed him, you might just find your career on ice, fast. Back then, the industry was like a chessboard, and Diddy, he was playing everyone like pawns. Rappers would pop off under his label, get famous, then suddenly vanish. No money, no masters, no explanation, just silence. And behind closed doors, there were always rumors. Contracts being flipped, money disappearing, artists retiring out of nowhere. Hammer kept his distance, but he wasn't blind. He saw how Diddy was rising, and he saw who kept falling around him. From Biggie to Shine to Craig Mack. Too many names, too many questions. And as more lawsuits hit the surface today, it's like all those quiet warnings are finally coming back to haunt the game. What makes it even more sketchy is how many people stayed quiet. Big-name artists, label execs, producers, they knew something wasn't right. But the checks were fat, and the access was sweet. Nobody wanted to risk it all for the truth. But Hammer? He was already rich, already respected. He didn't need Diddy. And that's exactly why Suga felt safe enough to warn him. Because not everybody could afford to hear that kind of truth and survive it. Now we gotta wonder, how deep does this really go? Fast forward to today, and everything Suge and Hammer peeped back then is starting to spill out for the world to see. Former bad boy artists are finally speaking up. Lawsuits are piling, and all those old whispers, they're turning into full-blown allegations, some of them explosive. People once too scared to talk are now naming names. They're saying Diddy wasn't just a slick businessman. He was allegedly running things behind the scenes that were way darker than anyone imagined. Contracts that looked more like traps. Parties that sounded more like setups. And a trail of broken artists left behind while he stayed winning. Even folks who used to ride for him are backing off. Because once the spotlight hit, it lit up everything. That untouchable image Diddy built, it's cracking, and fast. And suddenly, clips like that old Suge interview don't sound paranoid. They sound real. It's like puzzle pieces finally connecting. Suge wasn't just talking crazy. He was trying to warn the ones who still had something to lose. What's wild is how many stories we still haven't heard. If this is what's leaking out now, Imagine what's still locked away in NDAs and sealed settlements. Imagine who's still scared to talk. But one thing's clear. People are finally listening. And Hammer. He's been out the spotlight for a minute, but the fact that his name's getting pulled back into this tells you he knew something real early. And here's the twist most people forget. Hammer might have stepped back from the charts, but he never stepped out of the loop. He kept connections in the streets, the boardrooms, and the back rooms of the industry. So while folks clowned him for going broke, what they didn't know was that Hammer still had access. He still knew who was doing what and where the bodies were buried, figuratively, and maybe more. See? Hammer went through his own battles. IRS drama, lawsuits, and a flashy lifestyle that caught up fast. But he never blamed anyone. He took his hits, stayed low, and built back slowly, quietly, respectfully. And that's why his name still holds weight to this day. Unlike Diddy, who's now drowning in scandals and courtrooms, Hammer never had anyone accusing him of dirty dealings. No survivors, no mysterious payouts, no dark party rumors. Just a man who tried to balance fame, faith, and business in a cutthroat game. And that's exactly why people are paying attention to that old Suge clip again. 'Cause Hammer might have been dancing, but he wasn't sleeping. If he listened to Suge, and Suge was calling out Diddy decades ago, then maybe this was never about paranoia. Maybe it was just the truth being ignored. And if these new lawsuits keep pulling back the curtain, we might find out Hammer knew a lot more than he ever said out loud. Hammer was one of the first hip-hop artists to truly break into mainstream global pop culture and stack massive money. Album sales, world tours, big brand deals, merch. You name it, he was cashing out. But what really made him stand out? He wasn't tangled up in the same mess that swallowed a lot of other rappers in the 90s and early 2000s. Yeah, he had respect in the streets, no doubt about that. But his public image? Clean as a whistle. No drug scandals, no late-night arrests, no wild groupie rumors, no baby mama drama either. In fact, Hammer's been married to the same woman, Stephanie, since 1985. They've got 5 kids, and even took in his nephew like their own. That's rare in this game. Real talk, MC Hammer might have been the blueprint for how to blow up big in rap without getting dragged down by scandal. Sure, he took some L's with his finances and made headlines for losing his fortune. But he never lost his soul, or his family, or his grip on reality. And that's more than a lot of folks from that era can say. And looking back, that clean lifestyle might have been the one thing that saved him. Because when you peep the patterns in the industry, especially the circles Diddy ran in, it's always those wild party scenes where things turned dark. Artists got caught up in weird energy, shady invites, and freaky setups. Diddy was throwing the biggest, craziest parties in the game. But Hammer? He kept his distance. He was never in that mess. Now here's where things really take a dark turn. There's a rumored convo that allegedly went down between Suge Knight and MC Hammer. The two were tight during the mid-90s, and Hammer even had some brief ties with Death Row after Tupac's death. But according to folks who were close to the scene, Suge pulled Hammer aside and dropped some serious heat about Diddy. At first, it was the usual talk. Diddy allegedly snaking artists, snatching talent, and flipping contracts behind closed doors. But Suga didn't stop there. He supposedly told Hammer something way more disturbing. In a resurfaced interview, Suge hinted that Tupac had discovered something about Diddy that went far beyond shady business. According to what Suge claimed, Tupac believed Diddy wasn't just manipulating careers. He was allegedly using his industry power to cross serious lines, especially with young male artists. Not just about who he was into, but how he was allegedly using that power. Tupac wasn't bothered by Diddy's preferences. His issue was the predatory energy behind it, especially toward young and vulnerable talent. And Suge? He didn't keep that to himself. He allegedly warned Hammer straight up, and Hammer took that seriously. He was already staying away from Hollywood's wild scenes, but after that convo, he reportedly made a point to keep clear of Bad Boy and Diddy altogether. Even more? Sources say Hammer tried to put some younger artists on game, quietly warning them to be careful who they trusted as they came up in the industry. Because whatever he heard, it shook him deep. And let's not forget, back in those days, nobody was really calling this stuff out. The industry had a code. People looked the other way. If someone powerful was doing dirt behind the scenes, it got swept under the rug. Fast. But Suge? He was one of the few who didn't care about playing it safe. And Hammer? He was one of the few who actually listened. That's what makes this whole story so wild. Hammer had every reason to stay quiet. He had the fame, the endorsements, the respect. Speaking up could have cost him all of it. But instead of chasing clout or turning a blind eye, he kept his circle tight and his distance even tighter. And let's be real. How many up-and-coming artists back then wished they had someone like Hammer in their corner? Someone who wasn't trying to get them lit at some party, but actually trying to protect them from the madness. Because behind the champagne and flashing lights was a darker scene that's only now getting exposed. Now that these lawsuits are dropping and more victims are stepping forward, it's clearer than ever. Suge wasn't just talking, and Hammer wasn't just dancing. They saw something. They knew something. And the fact that all this is coming out now? It's no coincidence. The industry is finally cracking. That wall of silence is falling. And all those backroom conversations, the warnings, the secrets, the receipts, they're starting to hit the surface. So now the question is, who else knew? And how many stayed quiet to protect their spot at the table? So now, looking back, with all these disturbing accusations circling Diddy like sharks, this old story hits way harder. Suddenly, Suge's warning doesn't sound like old-school beef. It sounds like a heads-up that too many people ignored. You really gotta ask, how much did folks know back then about what Diddy was allegedly doing? And how many tried to sound the alarm before it was way too late? So many artists who got close to Diddy ended up in courtrooms, flat broke, or in way worse situations. But Hammer, he stayed in his own lane. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was Suge's warning. Or maybe Hammer just had the kind of street smarts and discipline most folks didn't. Either way, he sidestepped a trap that swallowed a whole lot of others. And now that the truth is bubbling to the surface, people are looking back and realizing Hammer saw it coming. But I want to know what you think. What was the real reason Hammer never got wrapped up in that industry party scene? Was it faith? Focus? Or something he saw that made him stay away? And when it comes to Diddy, do you believe Tupac had it right all along about what he suspected? If so, has the industry been sweeping this under the rug for decades? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't hold back. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and smash subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We've only scratched the surface. Catch you in the next one.